Yeah. Hello, my name is Tyler Thornton, and my teammates and I are student researchers at Washington State University. We've kind of been united under the IDEX banner, you could say, that stands for Integrated Design Experience. Today we're hoping to inform you all a little bit about the idea of a micronized wood product plant, and more specifically the idea of locating it at Hermann Brothers Logging in Port Angeles, Washington. Before I get into a little bit of the details of this process, it's very critical to note what makes this all possible. And what makes the integrated design experience possible is NARA. NARA is funded by a USDA grant, and it was awarded about 5 years ago. The overall overarching most critical goal of NARA is to create sustainable biofuel using post-harvest timber residuals. So these are the products in the forest that are typically wasted after logging operations, and NARA looks at running those on through a process and eventually outputting biojet fuel. Along this process, however, it's not just biojet fuel that's created. There's an opportunity with various co-products and different constituent materials that are created throughout this process that NARA is looking into and actively researching to both provide new markets as well as new uses for these kinds of materials. So we've mentioned two products, and those to create those two products, it's absolutely imperative that there is an integration of NARA with rural communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. The processes that NARA is proposing and researching would absolutely provide a true economic stimulus to various communities around this region. Once those kind of processes are in place, NARA looks at connecting all these specialized individual communities with supply chains. Last but certainly not least, and something that I know means a lot to me as a student, is the idea of bioenergy literacy. So throughout all this research, NARA looks at putting out materials such as this webinar that you're viewing today, and as well as the research and various informational materials that allow the next generation and people to understand exactly what it takes to create sustainable energy. So I mentioned this milled wood process previously. Where exactly does that fit within this NARA goal? So as you can see from this diagram here, and we'll be referencing this diagram periodically throughout the rest of this presentation, the milled wood process takes the biomass out of the forest. It's kind of an aggregated mess at that point, and converts it on down to a uniform and very bioavailable feedstock for integrated biorefineries throughout the region to convert on down into those co-products that I mentioned before, as well as that critical isobutanol that will be further refined down into that biojet fuel that we're so proud of. So again, I also mentioned Hermann Brothers Logging. Now Hermann Brothers is an absolute innovator in this field, and more particularly and more specifically, as you can see in this picture here, they're experts in taking that biomass out of the woods and on down into I guess you could say, civilization. Now, from that point, they use it primarily as hog fuel, supplying local businesses with that. But we're looking at the potential for a new process for them. And again, it all starts out with this new process with biomass. Now, in order to talk a little bit more about this, as our local biomass expert, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler. So the first and very important step to our analysis is to show that there's a sustainable supply of biomass available on the Olympic Peninsula to supply our new pilot plant. Our new pilot plant will have a demand of 50,000 bone-dry tons a year, and will be located at Hermann Brothers Log, as Tyler stated. Some questions right off the top would be, is there enough biomass available, and at what cost, and how is it currently being harvested, or how heavily is it being harvested? So I think an important fact to note would be that only 14% of the biomass currently available on the Olympic Peninsula is being marketed. What that means is that only 14% of the biomass that has been put into piles at harvest sites or along the roadside is actually being marketed, and most of that is being marketed by Hermann Brothers. So there's a lot more available than what we are currently marketing on the Olympic Peninsula. So in order to quantify how much biomass is available, we used a geographic information system software. It's specifically a network analyst tool within that software. And what this network analyst does is it accounts for road lengths and speed limits and creates an area out to different distances based on a transportation cost. Within that model, there are some assumptions which include a fixed cost for each bone-dry ton of biomass, and those fixed costs total at $39.50 per bone-dry ton. And that accounts for collecting the residuals to the landing, the grinding and loading in the trips, and a truck wait time. So from that model, we were able to compile a supply curve for Hermann Brothers log based off of different costs per bone-dry ton delivered and then what the quantity available would be at that cost. So as you'd expect, as the cost per bone-dry ton delivered goes up, the bone-dry tons of biomass available increases at the same time due to the fact that you can go further to get it. We specifically looked at 3 different prices for our biomass to quantify this, and at a cost of up to $63 per bone-dry ton, we found that 122,000 bone-dry tons would be available on an annual basis. As you increase that to a cost of up to $68 per bone-dry ton, 174,000 bone-dry tons of biomass are available on an annual basis. And as you increase it $5 more to a cost of $73 per bone-dry ton, which basically encompasses all the land that we could access on the Olympic Peninsula, we figured to have just over 240,000 bone-dry tons available on an annual basis. An important thing to note is that these are very conservative estimates, and we have been doing a lot of research into other studies that have been done on the Olympic Peninsula which show far higher density of biomass in our area. And so we do feel like these numbers will go up from here and probably at a substantial amount. But even with this conservative estimate, we more than meet our 50,000 per bone-dry ton demand while still having excess to meet the other Nippon paper mill and Port Townsend paper mills hog fuel boiler demand in the region. Now that I've told you about the biomass and how we get it and how much it costs, Brent's going to tell you the equipment that will be used to process it at Hermann Brothers Log at our pilot plant.
Thank you, Tyler. As you said, my name's Brent. I'm going to be taking you out of the woods and sort of on-site and what this process entails. So first off, we have our Greenwood dry hammer mill that's going to take in what's already been chipped on-site by Hermann Brothers and break it down to about ½ inch. Next, we're going to take those chips that have just been broken down and we're going to throw it in a rotary dryer and bring it down to about 10% moisture content. After this, we put in another hammer mill, but this one's a dry wood hammer mill, and it brings it down to about 2 millimeters. This sort of brings us to the end of our coarse grinding of this micronized will process. So next up we have the fine grinding, and this occurs in the air classifier mill. It sort of grinds it down like grains, and we end up with a very small sort of wood flour at the end. Finally, the final stage of the process is the ball mill. The ball mill really breaks down those cellulose walls, and Dana will talk to you more about that. So where are we going to put this? As you can see right here, this is a map of Hermann Brothers log yard. Now I'm just going to introduce you to some of the stuff that's on site. As you can see, the first in your lower right, highlighted in white, is their truck scales. Next we have their feedstock area where they currently pile all their chips and use it for storage. Next is the debarker and chipper, where they send whole logs through to debark, and it's a massive chipper. It was sort of awesome to see on site. Finally, we have their water treatment site. And then, but where should we put the pilot plant? As we can see highlighted in the white, this is sort of my proposed area for the siting of the pilot plant. It seemed to be the most open area during my tour, and also that chipper and debarker are pulling in massive amount of energy. And I feel that would be cheaper to tie into those already existing utilities than try to sort of pioneer somewhere else on site. So how much does this stuff cost to operate? And that's where I'm going to hand it over to Victor to tell you that.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, important part of any feasibility analysis is what we call a techno-economic analysis, or a TEA. And what this is just a projection of the economic performance of the introduction of a process. And so what we want to do is complete a TEA for the introduction of our micronized wood process at Hermann Brothers Logging. Now, there are a few different aspects of a TEA. It involves projections of capital expenditures, operating expenditures, revenues, and what I have highlighted here in blue on the diagram that you see are the inputs to our milled wood process, and each of these have a cost associated with them, and that represents our capital expenditures and our operating expenditures. The first one I'm going to cover is the capital expenditures, and this is just any initial upfront cost that's needed when this process is introduced. A very large, sort of obvious capital expenditure that sticks out is the cost of equipment that Brent discussed earlier. The equipment not only needs to be purchased but also installed, and along with this equipment may also come the additional cost of utilities installation and perhaps any site preparation that might also need to take place. Next up is the operating expenditures, and these are any continuous costs that are incurred through the running of our process. These include the collection of additional biomass out in the forest. It also includes the transportation of that biomass to our wood mill, the transportation of our product away from our wood mill. This also includes the maintenance involved with our process, the labor needed to run our process, for which we estimate about a dozen or so employees will be needed to run our process on site. And this also includes the utilities that are needed to run all that equipment that Brent discussed. Now, the good news about our utilities cost is that our process is completely mechanical and doesn't require any water input. However, our process is very energy intensive, and the energy cost is going to be a substantial utilities cost. The figure I have here is a graph that was put together by NARA researchers, and what it represents is a comparison of the amount of energy it takes for the milling down to a given particle size. I have outlined here in the oval the particle sizes at 50 microns and below, and this is the area that we're shooting for with our milling process. As you can see, getting wood particles down this small requires a lot of energy, substantially more than even particles that are just a little bit larger, around 100 or 150 microns. Now, the next figure that I have here is an aerial view of the Hermann Brothers site, and that yellow band that you see down at the bottom represents a transmission line from Bonneville Power Administration. And this close proximity of Bonneville Power provides us with the opportunity to gain our power to run our process from Bonneville. And if this were to happen, it's could be the case that we may be able to receive power discount if we were to run our process during off-peak hours, which would substantially reduce our operating expenditures. Now, in order to complete a thorough TEA of our process, we're going to need to do additional research to come up with solid values for our capital expenditures, operating expenditures, and revenues. And we hope to do this through additional investigation as well as cooperation with our partners at Hermann Brothers. And next up, Dane's going to come up here and he's going to talk about our final product as well as its potential.
So hi, my name is Dane Kamenstein, and I will be talking about the final portion of our flow diagram. So we're going to kind of break this up into two pieces, where we talk about the micronized, what the product that a solids depot would actually make, as well as the products that consumers would actually use themselves. So we're going to start out just describe in a little bit more depth exactly what the product we're asking you guys to make is. Micronized wood is just these larger chips that are broken down into progressively smaller sizes until we get to something that we could compare to a wood flour that's actually, at least in texture, extremely similar to a flour that you might buy at a store. And then once it's broken down in this flour, other facilities could extract the individual components that make up this wood flour, since wood isn't just one homogeneous thing. So to describe that in a little bit more depth, I have a diagram right here that kind of shows the structure of a cell wall in just a real simplified form. So from a biofuel standpoint, what we're interested in is extracting these green lines. Those are the cellulose, and they are what we use to make biofuels. So in order to make those biofuels, we have to use your milled wood process to break down the structure of a cell wall. And now by doing that, we can use enzymes and potentially other chemicals to break down that cellulose and extract that cellulose. So there's the cellulose, just to highlight that one more time. But other components that make up wood include hemicellulose. So hemicellulose is extremely similar to cellulose, except that it is just harder to utilize. It's harder to change from a long chain molecule or long chain of molecules into fermentable sugars. And also lignin, which is completely different than cellulose or hemicellulose, but it has an immense amount of co-product potential. So hemicellulose and cellulose would both likely be used, at least this particular form of hemicellulose and hemicellulose and lignin would likely be used to create either biochar or activated carbon. So just to take one more look at our chain, we would assume that a solids depot would send its material to a conversion facility. This conversion facility would take material from, or would potentially take material from multiple solids depots, so maybe 5 or 3 solids depots could feed one conversion facility, and then that conversion facility would put out either isobutanol or another intermediate step to creating isobutanol, as well as beginning the process of separating hemicellulose and lignin from the cellulose that we will use to create this biofuel. So what does the market actually look like? What are we expecting to see from the market? Right now, there isn't really a market for biojet fuel because nobody's done it. But that's something that NARA is actively working on, and so recently they partnered with Alaskan Airlines, and they are conducting the 1,000 gallons of jet fuel project. It will be completed early next year. Right now it's scheduled to be completed in February, and it will be a flight using a combination of biojet fuel and traditionally produced petroleum-based jet fuel, and it will be a flight from Seattle to Washington, D.C. It's really, really exciting, and it's the start of what could hopefully become a new homegrown industry that the Northwest would be a huge part of. So now that we've covered our entire supply chain, I'd like to hand it back to Tyler Thornton, and he will close out our presentation today.
Thank you, Dane. And actually, thank you guys for tuning in and watching today. We actually are, as student researchers here, we're really excited about the potential of this entire process. And I hope that you have taken home a little bit of a better understanding of what this process entails, the product that it puts out, as well as understanding that there's a really cool potential of locating a pilot plant facility in Port Angeles, Washington. We feel like we're just barely scratching the surface with this presentation here today, and we're looking forward towards the next steps in this process of getting those hard numbers that various teammates have mentioned before, and really digging in deeper to the content of this presentation. We really do see an immense potential of combining with an industry innovator like Hermann Brothers, as well as a great community like Port Angeles, in making these things a possibility in the future. It actually appears that we do not have any questions that have been submitted during this live broadcast of this clip, but please, anybody who's watching or anybody who watches this clip later, please feel free to submit any and every question to us, and we'll look forward to answering those at our earliest possible convenience. Thank you guys very much again.